My name is Ishaan Menon, and I will be talking about democracy and the fallacies of democracy. Now, all of this will be with the backdrop of the Indian democracy, and therefore, we'll first discuss the Indian preamble. Now, there's a total of 9 important words on the preamble, but we'll look at the first 5 important words, okay? In that order: sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, republic. Now, let's look at those words, and let me explain each and every one of them, okay? In no particular order. The first being sovereign. Now, sovereign essentially means that the government or the body or the country is independent and is not under the control of another government or body. Then socialist being the achievement of socialist goals by democratic means. So this is a form of democratic socialism, okay? The next being secular. Now, I'm sure everybody here knows the meaning of secular. Secular meaning a country does not have an official religion. The next 2 words, republic, is a form of government which is not a monarchy, where the power lies in the people. The supreme power lies in the people. Now, there are 2 types of republics. There's democratic republics and there are oligarchies. An oligarchy being where only a group, only a certain class of people hold that supreme power, while a democracy being the general body of people holding that power. Therefore, the Indian government, the Indian institution is set out to be a democratic republic. Now, that is what we were written down to be. Now, let's segue into the actual matter, which, okay, democracy is 2 wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting that vote. Now that is credited to Benjamin Franklin. And that should give you a brief idea of the problems, right? Now that should hint at 2 problems. The first being majority. In a democracy, since it is part of a majoritarian rule, the rights of minorities are at stake. Think of Trump's America. Think of Boris Johnson and the UK. Think of China with the Uyghur Muslims. Think of Myanmar. And that gives you a sort of idea about how, although China is not a democracy, but an idea about how minorities are hugely at stake, and therefore protecting minority rights is protecting human lives and human rights. The next problem that the quote hinted at is liberty. Democracy is only as strong as its people. So for a democracy to work, people need to have the liberty to stand up. People need to have the liberty to express dissent. And therefore, they need to have an opposition. For a government to truly work for its people, a nation needs a strong opposition, an opposition that can go against the government when it's erring. And that is a problem in context to Indian democracy that we face. It has been 5.5 years that India has not had an official opposition. And you can see the effects that it's having on our democracy. The next is a fine balance. Now, government is a fine balance. For a government to truly work for its people, it is a very thin sliver of a subset where the government is not too weak, where the government is not too strong. On the other hand, the opposition is not too weak and the opposition is not too strong. And that sliver of a subset is obviously hard to achieve, as you can see in our current government. Moving forward, and pardon my French, all of you francophones, is something called après nous le déluge, which essentially means after me or after us, the flood. And it's credited to Louis the 14th or the 16th, or one of them. Which essentially, after us or after me, the flood. Which explains very well of how our democratic systems work, where a government has a certain term, and in that certain term, they look out for a mandate. Now, the thing is, there's a lot of work that needs to be done that isn't nice. There's austerity, there's increases in taxes, and all of that dirty work that keeps a government, that keeps a country running. But no politician wants to do that, right? If they're looking for a re-election, if they want to be elected into office again, they will not, by any means, do any of this work. And that is another problem. Now, a solution to this problem is to have term limits, like in the US, where you see that in the second term is when most presidents do all of the dirty work, since they have no aspirations to run for office again, since their term limit is ended. And yeah, that's quite a good solution. But on the overarching issue of Indian democracy is that we do not have term limits. And therefore, there is always an aspect or a prospect of re-election. Moving forward, since democracy is about people, people need to be empowered with information, with the correct information. And that we leave to the media. The media is our information outlet. And it's naive to believe that media corporations looking to earn profit are going to give us the information we need, are going to give us unbiased coverage. Because let's be honest, that is not going to happen. This is a clear conflict of interest, my God. Which is very clear in very recently NDTV, that India's strongest media house that is in opposition of the government, just had a significant amount of its stock purchased by Reliance, a very close ally to the Modi government. People even call Reliance a puppeteer of the government. And thus that makes you think about how, of say Fox News, but in India you have all the channels are Fox News, and then you have one NDTV that is our CNN or MSNBC. So the general electorate being incapable of actually making decisions that impact the lives of millions. Now, a quote from this article says, when people are no longer able to make democratic decisions independent of media influence, which ultimately comes down to monetary influence, then how do we define civil engagement? And that adds on to the problem that a recent Oxfam report stated that 8 of the richest men in this country own wealth equal to the bottom 50% of our population. Let me quantify that for you. 8 men hold the same amount of profit as the sum of 680 million people. That's 750 million. Now, that is not a fortune. That is blood money plundered and looted from the poor. That is coming off of the back of the poor. And I'll be damned if one day these 8 men wake up and think of, oh, I am going to give up all of my money to make sure that the people, my brothers and sisters and others of this country will prosper. They're going to keep on holding this power. They're going to pass it to their generations and just grow on this. So essentially, that is not a government. That my Fallacies, that is not a democratic republic. That is an oligarchy run by kleptocrats. The next point that makes any government really, really accountable is checks and balances. And that is a thing that really stands for the people. Say the Right to Information Act in India, our Supreme Courts, the Central Bank of India, that is the Reserve Bank of India, and the eroding power of these banks, of these checks in power. There's these institutions that make sure that the government speaks for its people is essentially wrong. And any measure that reduces the power of these institutions should be taken as an attack on democracy itself, because that is exactly what it is. Moving on. strategic voting. That is a thing that is not really talked about, because the first past the post system makes it evident that you will not vote for who you like. It's not going to be always that you are going to have that perfect candidate that you want to vote for, who also has a chance of representing you, right? When a majority comes into power, what about the voices of the minority, right? When you vote, right, you vote for a person in your constituency and they do not win. Your vote is then meaningless, right? And that is the problem with strategic voting, where you do not vote for the person you believe to lead the country. And therefore, what I'm proposing, this is also something that happens in our upper house of parliament. It's called the single transferable vote, where you rank individuals, and therefore it is much more likely that someone of your preference will be able to represent you. Moving on, all of this democracy shenanigans is built on an assumption that politicians want what's best for the country, but we have seen that is not true. It is naive to believe that politicians always want what's best for our country, and just continuing with this assumption is going to be extremely problematic for us. Next is, and finally, is the belief that everyone has this belief that, at least I have this, is that there's only a certain kind of people that are fit for politics, right? You've heard of that before, saying that politics isn't for someone, or they aren't for politics. But politics is a one job where, regardless of your mental ability, regardless of your physical capacity or your economic background, you are fit for the job if you represent an idea, if you represent someone. And therefore, politicians isn't and shouldn't be about rich, able-bodied Hindu Brahmin men, Hindu Brahmin heterosexual men, might I add, to run, right? Politics is about everyone. It's about all of us. And it's time for us to claim that space. Thank you.